You are very welcome along. It is time for the Sunday Papers. If you're getting us on Twitter, you can tweet us at Off The Ball, or if you're watching on YouTube, we'd love if you left a comment below and give us a thumbs up as well. We're going to be with you for the next hour or so, and I'll take you through some of the headlines first off. And as you can imagine, it is rugby leading the way pretty much everywhere this morning. Ireland falls short is the headline on the front of the Sunday Independent sports section. Missed opportunity in Paris for Andy Farrell's side as France end Grand Slam dream. The back of the Irish Daily Mail, meanwhile, goes with reality check. Ireland's winning run comes to a shuddering halt in Paris cauldron, but Farrell focuses on the positives. The Sunday World, meanwhile, go with we blew it. Errors allow French juggernaut roll over our Grand Slam dream. A photograph there of Antoine Dupont scoring at the opening try after just a couple of moments of the game yesterday, when I think everybody thought that it could have been a bit of a disaster for Ireland. As it turned out, it was a 6-point defeat in the end, and potentially could have been a better result for Ireland. The back of the Irish Sun on Sunday, Merci killing is the headline on the Rugby, which shares the back page with Paul Pogba. Shirkers is their headline on that story. Their 1-1 draw with Southampton in view here. Paul Scholes quoted from BT Sport: flops don't want to put a shift in, and Luke Shaw says stop the rot or forget Champions League. You've also got Gordon Manning reporting from Croke Park there yesterday. The greatest ever late show at Croke Park, he says. Late boomers earned first titles. Incredible scenes. Ballygunner with that astonishing goal to beat Ballyhale in the hurling final, and then of course Kilcoo after extra time with Lake all of their own to win their title against Kilmacud Crokes. The back page of the Star on Sunday is French fried. France 30, Ireland 24, with a picture of a fairly dejected looking Finlay Beelum there. Nasty Nick then is their headline on Manchester United. Ralph hits back at Scholes, but knows United need more aggression. And also David Moyes says it's damaging. He knows the damage that cat kicker Kurt Zouma has done to the club, he says on the back of the Star. The Sunday Mirror then, they lead with Manchester United. Stop being saints. Booed off by fans and raging Ralph tells United, get nasty and we can go far. Andy says this is only the start. That is of course Andy Farrell talking about Ireland's 6-point defeat in Paris yesterday. And then the Sunday Times goes with falling short. Ireland lose in Paris but go down fighting. And also there, Ranić, my players need to be nastier. So that is a flavour of the back pages this morning, Manchester United, but the rugby dominating things. Sports writer Cliona Foley is with us in studio. How are you getting on, Cliona?
Good, thank you.
And Gavin Cummisky of the Irish Times, also with us in studio. 2 studio guests. I was shot down earlier on when I suggested that we wave green flags and have Ireland's call blaring out here, but we move and we do not do such a thing. Gavin, this is really interesting, the coverage this morning. It seems that there is a little bit of a conflict between the tone coming out of the Ireland camp and some of the analysis of certainly the decision making late on in that game.
Yeah, well, it just all comes back to James Ryan was the captain, and himself and Joey Carbery made a decision to kick 3 points in the 72nd minute when Ireland were behind by 6, and it proved the ball game. Now afterwards, first thing I did this morning when I woke up was I read Brendan Fanning, Peter O'Reilly, David Walsh to make sure my eyes weren't confusing me or something. What I saw was you definitely go for the corner, you go for the 4-try bonus, so even if you do lose, you're walking away with that. The 3 points that Joey Carbery kicked implied that they were going for a draw, and they came out strongly afterwards and said we thought we were going to get another opportunity, and we did. But the only people who were speaking publicly about saying it was the right call are the Irish camp. Everyone who has eyes and could see what happened. And at the time, this is not hindsight stuff. Everyone was screaming at their TVs that I know that you don't kick those 3 points. You go for the win. France were knackered and they got to regroup under their posts, and then they came back and won the game. So Andy Farrell is. I think what happened was Carbery and Ryan were interviewed quite quickly after the game, and they both come out with coach was completely the right decision. Both of them said it really strongly. So Andy Farrell can't go into a press conference then and go against his captain and his out half, who were his young captain and his young out half, who were going to be driving Ireland to the next World Cup. So he just said, Farrell comes out and goes, yeah, it's the right decision, there's no doubt about that. They feel the game, they're in the moment, they understand what's happening, and there was plenty of time left. In the moment, they didn't feel the game correctly as far as every rugby correspondent's opinion. So, you know, I think they've out of a brilliant second half performance and a great comeback, they've created a little rut for themselves that was completely avoidable by what had destroyed their cliches about learnings, and they would have been out the gate here and everyone would be focusing on what was a fantastic performance in the second half.
They scored off a line out as well, haven't they? They scored
now the line out had been shaky all day,
yes,
though.
It had,
so maybe
but they had got a try off a line
I think it was Peter Riley or Brendan Fanning implied that maybe Ryan was a bit shaky after, and he had gone off injured and come back on. Maybe he was a bit shaky because the line out beforehand had let them down, and he was like, "We'll take the points and come back." But the logic of the 3 points there, it demanded that you need to go get another try to win the game. So why not get the try, get in front for the first time in the match, and then batten down the hatches? France, again, as they proved, were going to come back down and get another score. Look, it was a poor decision, and the fact that they're digging their heels in is just going to create a narrative that is so easy to avoid.
Well, Peter O'Reilly's one on it is, he also says, I think, because you could see there was a huddle, and I think Ian Henderson might have been
huddle,
not far away as well. So he mentions it because he said a few players seemed to be in on the decision making. It may have been Ian Henderson who made the call for goal, but he is a very telling line. He said, "You know what Sexton would have done." And I think probably a lot of people at home were thinking Sexton would have gone for the line.
The French pack definitely agreed with the decision.
Well, it gave them a breather as well.
Because they were on.
It gave them a breather. They were wrecked.
Cliche. Ireland literally had their foot in their throat. They were they were run out of gas. Their subs hadn't made the impact that they were supposed to make physically. Like people like Finlay Beelum, I thought that was going to be a problem. It wasn't. But you could see the props were left on. The Irish props were left on for ages.
Yeah.
But yeah, France just completely calmed down when they kicked that point. Where it's like, after this goes over the bar, we're still in front and we're going 50 metres upfield. It's a poor decision. It was the wrong decision, you know.
And the thing is that the tone is that it was absolutely the correct call. It's not so much a tone of, you know, we'll try and assess that as the week goes on, or maybe on a different day they could have done something different. It's very much this was the correct call. So, like, I mean, is there an outcome here that they're looking at that wasn't draw? Like, I mean, that's the only explanation here. But even that is a fairly unsatisfying outcome, isn't it?
But did they know they had 3 tries? That's what would be a question we're putting to them straight after the game. Look, I'll say what Brendan Fanning said about it. He goes, "This raises the issue of leadership. In the last few days, Ireland coach has had back-to-back concerns about his crew of captains. First, Johnny Sexton pulled out, been presented as a minor soft tissue. Then Ryan went off just before half-time, and we feared the worst. Now, he did come back on. He was back in harness as the team ran out for the second half. You'd never questioned the bravery, but that call to chase 7 points was a bad read." And it's very hard not to dress it up that way. It does. Look, again, they've lost in Paris, a courageous defeat in Paris, and it does bring a focus on their leadership, because when Ireland are in a World Cup quarter-final in France in 2023, probably in a similar cauldron to this, it will be Ryan and Carbery making the calls. Yeah. And if they make a call like that, we'll get knocked out of the World Cup, you know. Yeah. And they will have to make I'm pretty sure it's going to be the two of them making those calls, so long as they don't both get injured. They are going to be the two senior men, and that is an out-halves decision every day of the week. Like, it's always, your out half overrules your captain in that situation, and we go for, and Sexton definitely would have gone for the win, because he's also very good at doing maths on the pitch. He's very good at reading situations. He knows the flows of games. That's one of his strengths. But yeah, I'm not trying to heap it on Carbery, because he had a fine game, you know, and it was his first Six Nations start, and it was in Paris. But that's when he takes the ball and goes, no, the 3 points is not as much use to us now. Let's kick to the corner and let's. And the thing is, they not necessarily would have won. They would have gone a point up. And I bet you, I do think, because he kicked 2 touchliners beforehand, they go 1 point up with his conversion from a maul try, and it just puts all the pressure on France, as opposed to France were walking up to halfway 3 points up with no pressure on them, just like, let's go kill the game.
Yeah. And it physically gave them a breather as well, and you could see they were really struggling. They were really, really struggling for gas. Like, the consensus generally across the papers, and it varies, is Carbery did a good job up to a certain point. That is the one area of question.
Why was he taken off?
Yeah, he's taken off incredibly late in the game, and
somebody threw a forward pass that
somebody mentions that. Actually, I think Neil Francis in the Sunday Times says that. Why on earth was he taken off when the match was there to be won?
He says the coach blinked. Is Neil Francis' line when they were chasing
get into a game in the 78th minute, you know. It's not fair on him either. But maybe he had a knock, so we'll give them the benefit of the doubt.
And the one other one, I suppose, if you're just looking at anything else that's been raised as well, Brendan Fanning is very emphatic in his opinion when he says when Ireland, through bravery and opportunism, had made a game of it again and needed to get from third gear to fourth, Conor Murray was not the man for the job, and he just felt
everything slowed down when he came on.
Yeah,
and you notice Conor Murray comes on the pitch for Gibson Park because he's so much taller. You know, he just stands, and the 9 is the person you see every time you're looking at the screen.
Now and he's not blaming anything. Like I suppose the tenor of Brendan Fanning's piece is, look, physically they had it on us. You know what I mean? That's the frailty that's there. It's just we just do not have people of that size.
Gibson Park had a great game when you consider every ruck took 2 to 3 seconds. There was no quick ball. That's how France won this game. That's how Ireland have lost all their big games over the years. So their ball gets slowed down. And this team in particular, it's a team of Andy Farrell's team is a team of athletes. That's the way they're going to be for the next while. Everyone's a back rower in the pack. That's the whole way, and they really are. Like Tyke Byrne yet again had a brilliant game. He should have 50 more caps than he has already. You know,
it's been outstanding. But just on the Carbery
physically
thing,
they couldn't live with them,
and we'll get to that in just a moment. But just to kind of wrap up on the Carbery point, is the experience at the end of the game yesterday not exactly the sort of thing we've been yearning for over the last little while?
Exactly.
Should Sexton be? You know,
I think you're right. Like also Carbery hasn't played that much. You know what I mean? He was
really
literally coming in very undercooked. So absolutely, these are the big games. He needs to get the experience in.
Yeah.
I mean, that's for sure.
Like, I mean, does it come down to a talking point now that you look at someone like Joey Carbery and it's going to take time to maybe not make a conservative decision, as Bernard Jackman describes it in the paper this morning, to make that brave decision, that'll just come with experience.
And confidence as well, I think.
It's
about confidence.
And it will come with maybe a brave coaching decision potentially over the next few months when they go down to New Zealand. Is that a sort of cauldron that you're just throwing Joey Carbery into straight away as your starting 10 and saying, listen, this is it now. If we really are this obsessed about the World Cup, this is your chance to be in those sort of moments where you got to make these sort of decisions. He's
going to finish in Twickenham, or he's going to start in Twickenham anyway. He needs a few more games before he goes to New Zealand, because that's not a place to learn. So this decision, himself and James Ryan will be in conclave again this year, I imagine, about something similar to this. But either trying to stay in a game against a huge pack, or about, like, the French were so obviously flagging, you know, and maybe they're a united front against the whole world. Everyone can see what happened, so fine, that's good for their unity and all that, but privately they need to be having discussions about what we do the next time we're in this situation.
Isn't there a confidence that you need in a number 10, you know, like even looking at Finn Russell, no matter whether it's right or wrong, he will do it because he believes this is the right thing to do. And I just think Carbery is lacking that self-confidence, and that will only come with more and more of these big games where you have all that pressure piling on you and you make big decisions, and then you think, I can make those decisions again. You know, it's just it's a confidence thing.
He doesn't lack self-confidence. He does, because he's never been in the situation. But he's closed out 2 games against the All Blacks. He loves big occasions. He seems like a fearless, and his place kicking was really important. Was really good. So I doesn't like. We're not going on about transitions now in Sexton anymore. But there's no harm with Joey Carbery starting in Twickenham. That's if you want to think about the World Cup, that's what you do.
Shane McGrath in the Mail this morning says Carbery will come good out of this. He will start against Italy, and if he plays well there, he should keep his place. He says form should be rewarded, sport is ruthless, and he says that if the veteran Johnny Sexton had started, the outcome would have been the same yesterday. Do you go along with that?
No. Ireland would have won if Sexton was playing.
Well, no, I'm not sure that they would have won, but I think they would have gone. They would have gone for the line-out. That's the difference, I'd say.
For a better chance of winning.
They just scored a try off the line-out maul, so yeah.
And is it just that decision? Are you looking at the rest of Carbery's game yesterday and saying,
Carbery and Gibson Park played very well, considering they were on the back foot the entire game,
so much pressure,
and they were swarmed the entire game, and they held their own and they grew into the game, and their pack. It was monumental stuff from the pack to get so badly beaten up for about 50 minutes and then to claw their way back into it. Like Kelleher got taken out, Sheahan came on and was just like, there's a test hooker for the next 10 years, no problem.
It looks very good.
James Ryan went off, Ian Henderson came on, Peter O'Mahony came on, I think he got HIA'd and he was gone, and so like it was all hands on deck the entire time. Like this was France's we are the best team in the world kind of a party, and you could that's what it looked like in the Stade de France. They were like wanted to ram that home and prove it, but they showed real flaws in 60 to 70 minutes when Ireland started to creep back into the game. One thing I noticed after in the last 6 months under Andy Farrell is Ireland are going to be in every single game against every single team they play against. That's just the way this team is built now, you know what I mean, and that backed it up, so that's encouraging. But there is a leadership issue, but these lads have never been in these leadership positions enough, you know, so that again it is a good thing that, but it was the wrong decision.
The thing is that Bernard Jackman kind of points to that then. He says in the French context, the decision of their management to go to Australia last summer without their frontliners looks to have been an inspired choice. Granted, there's a much greater player pool that they would have had the luxury of doing that compared to Ireland, but they had to go through a little bit of short-term pain.
And you produce Jamine, you know,
Well,
who's
because
of the
already
league,
seems
because of the
to
league, the
come
French
in,
are
like,
always going without their top
course.
players
Yeah,
because the league's still
yeah,
on. So points fair enough, I suppose.
The one thing that I caught my eye this morning, and I couldn't believe he said it, Rory Best is writing for the Sunday Independent, and like the most desperate mistake that Ireland made at the very start of the game, allowing that quick line out. And his comment is, it happens in Paris. They just leave the dressing room wired for action. Like, I don't understand how you can say that. Like, these are professional players. Ireland come out equally hyped up, surely. But like that first try all came from probably not a great kick from Gibson Park. And then the line-out was done before MD even knew what had happened. It was a piece of genius, of course, by Dupont. But like, how... Do you know, that's the one thing you do say. How can you not be tuned in for that at the start of the game? And how can you say France are really tuned in more, you know, in Paris?
If Ireland are kicking with this Ireland team, that means they're in trouble because...
It was just such a bad error that put them on the back foot,
it means that they
wasn't
just
it?
have slow ball, you know.
Yeah, it was just such a bad error that put them on the back foot straight away, like 20 seconds in or
Matt
whatever.
Hansen, though, Cliona, as well.
Yeah, I know. That was
a million try.
And it was the
brilliant
catch.
drop off by
He went to
Carbery.
the left as well. You see where he caught. It wasn't even a straightforward over the head catch. It was an incredible piece of skill.
New
Fantastic.
superstar from Australia.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely brilliant. Like, so then just to kind of go back to what you were talking about there, Gavin, in terms of the power that Ireland came up against in that pack. Why is this different to the concerns that Ireland would have had about a power game in 2019, for example? Because like Rory Best is making the point that it's going to be an issue against England when we meet them too. So this is going to be a theme, and it has been a theme for Ireland.
Yeah, well, it's always been a team as well, but that's why the Irish team is a pack of. That's why the props are like. That's why the two hookers that Ireland have now, Kelleher and Sheahan, they are back rowers. You know, that's why Byrne is a second row. We know he's a six. You know, he's an open side almost. So we have a method of playing against these gargantuan packs, but the most important thing for James and Gibson Park to run the show is quick ball. And France, Galtier and the lads, they just said, look, if you get in and you stymie that, they cannot beat. Ireland can't beat you. You know, if you just slow their ball down by half a second, the Irish attacks flounders. You see, there was so much tackling behind the gain line. That was all Williamson was slowing the ball down. It was all the
clearly targeted.
Yeah, he just did it all day, and it only just takes a second of him just getting in there. And Ireland tried to do it to them and just physically couldn't do it. They just got blown out of it, you know.
Also, I don't think England are going to provide the same sort of challenge.
Unless two laggies probably going to be back. So
yeah, maybe, but they don't look as anything like as good as they dominant, and they don't look as creative. I mean, Farrell obviously is a problem being without him, but I just haven't seen. I just the first game, I don't think you're going to get that same combination that France have of power and pace and skill. I don't think England have shown that.
Ed Jones must be allowed coach just for World Cups.
That was just what I was about to say.
It just must be part of the package of the deal. Because they've messed up so many Six Nations, and he's always master plan. It feels like they're tied up in knots now, and everything is just revolves around having two.
It's like John Kiley with the Limerick hurlers. Just give them the championship.
It's a very good point. Is it a situation though that we're seeing two nations going at trying to win the World Cup next year, and France being like, screw it, let's just win every single game. Let's just come out this year and just win every game. Whereas England are like, keep our powder dry. 2023, we hit the ground running.
There's clarity to France.
Yeah.
There's been clarity since Galtier took over for the first time ever.
Yeah.
Where you can really see the coaching and the clarity and the levels of fitness, the defence. Everything is just the worst nightmare for the world, for France to get their act together. It's happening now.
Was it in the Irish Times? It was in your paper yesterday. It was a very good piece on him, and there was like, you know, he is not liked. He is extremely hard on players.
Galtier.
Galtier.
He's difficult.
Serious disciplinarian.
He had a go at Sexton there yesterday, saying Sexton motivated us. But all Sexton said was we just want to silence the crowd, and he just flipped this on its head, you know.
But he's brought that discipline to them. You know, that hasn't been there.
Sean Edwards has too.
Yeah, and Sean Edwards clearly defensively as well.
And that Sean Edwards point is mentioned by Bernard Jackman in his piece. He says yesterday's loss is far from fatal. Farrell and his coaching group know they had an opportunity to see how the best defence coach in the world tried to stop them, and from a scrum point of view, we will need to find a way to overcome a huge weight deficit. He says, like, better to be exposed to these things now and still have a real chance rather than at a later stage when there's no time to come back, which we've kind of discussed already. But does the way in which France overpowered Ireland yesterday frank the change in style of play that Ireland have produced over the last little while? Because it seems to me that maybe a Schmidt game plan would have been a little bit more predicated on power than the current one is.
Well, Schmidt game plan is not much different in the sense that the way Paul O'Connell coaches now as well is it's all about excellence at the ruck, like perfection at the ruck, that gets you quick ball, and then you can do anything you want with it. So that's the same thing.
Ireland
are playing South Africa in the World Cup quarter final, probably, or so. France is the best test for what South Africa is. So now I'd be interested to see how O'Connell and Easterby and Fogarty talk about what they do next when somebody like Williamson is in there slowing the ball down. Is it a Caelan Doris's job? Is it someone's job to just remove, to be like perfection at the rucks is everything. If you get it, we've just never got it in big games at World Cups, but you've seen it in big, like against New Zealand last November. We proved that we can do it. France are slightly more disruptive pack, so it's a very coachable thing for us. Everything is like, it's not the end of the world seeing a big pack dominate them like that, because you saw the way they clawed their way back into it, and that was also down to like excellent technique, like perfect technique going in over the ball, securing ball. And Gibson Park's try like even shows it himself. Like France were ragged enough that he had a one-on-one with Williamson actually and stepped him for the try. So there is I'd be really interested to see how the Irish coaches talk about how they handle the next French back that does this.
Yeah, Rory Best is actually quite good on that today. That was the only thing I thought. I just took issue with that and saying like they were all asleep, but he does talk about the angle that you're going in at the ruck, and he was saying if you get, you've got to get lower, otherwise you're just going in to get it with a wrestling match on these. If you're smaller in the wrestling match, you're going to lose it. So he does actually. That's the one thing he probably gives good insight, a very good insight into that
as well.
But yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So are we saying here then that this is going to be long-term gain after yesterday's pain for Ireland? Is that what we're saying? Like, I mean, David Walsh is saying Ireland have had some really good days in Paris, but the second half performance was perhaps the best 40 minutes they've played at this stadium. Like, that is the level of praise that is in the papers.
It was a great test match.
Yeah,
it truly was. We've just had I don't think it's the same as the nearly misses Ireland have had in the past. It does feel a little bit different, because in every other year they would have lost by 20, 30 points there. We've come back in just brave returns in the past, but this one, the team came back and should have won the game. That's the difference. It's not it wasn't just a brave defeat. It was something that they're disgusted that they're not going to win a Grand Slam this year. I think it can motivate them to win the championship, because they know that there's no other team as good as that. Everyone else they play now, they should be a better rugby team. So if they improve the leadership and the decision making at key moments, I think they can still go win the championship.
Brendan Fanning has a great line. He said it was a Valentine's weekend with all the romance of an abattoir. It's a good line. Also, can we give a shout out to Dan Bigger? I mean, talk about heroic, and it's covered in some of the papers today. But like, it was the equivalent. I kept thinking it was like that the scene from Monty Python where the guy gets his legs cut off. Finally, and he goes, "Come back and I'll bite your legs off." Like, how did he stay on the field and keep going? And there were times that I was looking at saying, "Take him off," because the guy is injured, and yet he refused to come off, and he just kept pulling out
Scotland
heroics.
Yet again can't back it up though.
Yeah.
Is it more a story of Wales or more a story of Scotland yesterday?
Yeah, no, fair play. You're right about everything you said.
And Russell getting carded again.
Can't back up beating England. It's the same old story for them, unfortunately.
Yeah, it definitely seems that way. We're going to leave the rugby there. We're going to have plenty more on OTB over the course of the next couple of days on that. We wanted to turn our attention to the football, because it's obviously been a fairly interesting week with regards to the League of Ireland towards the FAI, and of course a brand new bid. The World Cup dreams are dead, and the Euro dreams are once again alive after they were snatched from us last year as a result of COVID. So we've got a couple of people with a few different views on this. If we go to the Sunday Independent, we've got Tommy Conlon saying we might end up feeling a little bit silly if it comes to the neighbouring islands and we are left looking at it from the outside like Billy No Mates while they are making merry inside. So as you can tell, Tommy Conlon's in favour of the Euros coming to Ireland, whereas on page 64 on the Mail on Sunday, Shane McGrath takes a different view on that. The headline, "Misguided Euros bid distracts from real issues." Is it possible to have both of these things, to focus on the real issues and also have a pretty meaningful Euros bid?
Well, Barrett and Hale spoke for an hour to the Daily reporters this week, because they wanted to try and get that point across that it is possible to have them. And they refused to put a figure on how much the bid's going to cost. The real impression that they were trying to put out there was that this is almost in the bag, that they're going to win Euro 2028, and it's not going to cost us much. It's not going to affect how we invest in academies and everything. But we're like, okay, just tell us how much. And I think they just refused to say how much it's going to cost, because whatever that figure is, even if it's really low, it will be used to bang over their heads when somebody else when the facilities in this country are looked at. Not to quote Damien Duff again, but they are horrific in comparison to the GAA. So Yeah, it was a very interesting what they did this week. One of the things I noticed about it was Jonathan Hill wasn't left out there on his own as the chief executive, and the whole commuting to London, Dublin thing, Roy Barrett just put it away, saying this man is doing a good job as a CEO. We haven't got a shirt sponsor yet, but we're working hard on it, and him commuting is not that big a deal. It's a new world, move on. And he was also like, can we stop branding us as the old FAI? We're the new FAI. We have this board now, and he still didn't give us any reason, and didn't explain how the strategic plan is going to be put into practice.
Yeah,
and he didn't explain any of where the monies are coming from and how they're going to be spent. But it was still quite impressive, the two of them. There was a united front there between Barrett and Hill to the media, and it was supposed to be a 20-minute press conference, and it went for 54 minutes.
Right.
So they wanted to get away from the Dublin-London commute thing, so they were taking as many questions as they could. It was interesting. Barrett's very impressive, and the fact that he is going to make sure that Hill is seen, because nobody knows who Jonathan Hill is yet, not in this country. Like someone was saying to me, they're getting a taxi out to Abbottstown, and the taxi man goes, is Delaney still there, Yeah, I suppose that's one of the best things about the CEO now is people don't know him. You know what I mean? That's probably
always a good thing. They say, yeah, always a good thing.
Barrett made it very clear that there's a united. The FAI are all on the same page, and they're going for a bright new dawn.
Look at you. Do you know you can produce reports as long as you like, but it does always come back to money in a lot of ways. It comes back to leadership and it comes back to money. Philip Quinn in the Mail on Sunday has some interesting idea. Like it was pointed out during the week, but again that notion of we've got no shirt sponsor for the national senior men's team. What's going on here? The Irish Open Golf has got a sponsor recently. There was 1.8 million, he was saying, in sponsors across 2 days in Leopardstown recently. So do people view the brand as a bit toxic still? Should there be a name change? And I think that was probably raised at the press conference.
That's what Barrett was trying to say. He was like, this is a different brand that we're promoting now. They're changing the logo even.
Yeah, they haven't changed the name.
But it is Hill's job. Hill was brought as a commercial expert to bring in a sponsor. That was one of his main jobs.
That's his strength. Presumably from what you read about him.
They did say the market's changed, and the stuff that they do need to break on, it is a COVID market or post-COVID market, but that is one of the number one things that they need to do is put a name on a jersey.
Yeah. So Shane McGrath is absolutely against it, and he says, pitching for competitions. He says he's old enough to remember Gay Mitchell's desire to get the Olympics to Ireland. I remember that one as well, and the 2023 the bid for the World Cup. But so his I suppose his misguided Euros bid distracts from the real issues, and I think that's the worry for people is how much work would it involve, and would it distract people in the FAI from the vital work that needs to be done in the game?
There's a 3-man team on it, 2 FAI staff, and then Declan Conroy, who's been working on all the previous bids. Yeah. So they're not putting too much. They really did sound like they know that they've got this, because I think Portugal and Spain are switching to the World Cup 2030. So it sounded like this is a win-win. That was the vibe that they're trying to put out. But in the same thing, in the same press conference, you're asking them, going, okay, when are you going to hire a director of football? When are you going to get a sponsor? When's Stephen Kenny's contract coming out? What about replacing Anthony Barry, which is a huge hole that Kenny has to go fill? Which
is just popped up for him.
He nearly did too good a job in finding him in the first place. Because the way the noises about how he was doing his job were so good that Belgium just came and took him, and that's nobody's fault. But
needed more Anthony Barry slander, basically.
Yeah. The director of football, the lack of a director of football in the FAI is, I suppose, has to be top of the list before even a sponsor, because that's how everything. That's what leads it.
Yeah.
So, but they said Kenny's contract will be sorted and the management team before the Belgium game, which is March, I think.
Did you get any clarity on those questions, do you feel, the other day, or was it a sense of two fresh faces in an FAI context, and that's kind of papering over the same cracks that have always been there?
Really long, highly intelligent people giving answers without saying much.
Right.
It was quite interesting to get them to speak at length, because you could see, you could understand why Roy Barrett was MD of Good Bodies for so long. You get that from sitting with him in a press conference. But no, they didn't tell us how. One of the most interesting things was, does the director of football, does the FAI director of football not have to be Irish now? Because you really have to have a nuanced understanding of how this game works here. That was the one that was levelled. That was the negative that was levelled at Ruud Doctor the whole time. That did he understand the Irish game now, and also
even just to add to that, understand that nuances and that row that's going on between schoolboys as well. That's a very nuanced thing in the Irish context.
What do we do now with that? Does director of football has to either go one way or the other? Does he stay on the path that they were on previously with the Dutch ideas, or do they rip up that script? And so that's why he was leaning towards someone who has to really understand the Irish game and that kind of only points to an Irish person, you know.
Yeah. So if you look at Shane McGrath, that's his point, is that there are these nuances that these are the stuff that needs to be sorted out, and why have a distraction? As he was saying, the chance to host a Switzerland-Poland last 16 game in the Aviva Stadium in 6 years' time will not determine the ongoing health of Irish football. And then Tommy Conlon, as always, who's such a lovely writer, comes at it actually from a totally different point of view. Totally different point of view. And I think they're well worth reading, both of them. And he's basically, one is, look, there's people in there, things are changing, but one of the things about hosting big international stuff is just the general gaiety of the nation, if you like, and just the chance to have decent football here and people to go to have it. And he has a great line that he says, perhaps in this case a better metric might be this, the estimated contribution to the gaiety of the nation. Obviously it would take a different type of economist to measure that kind of spin-off. The purveyors of the dismal science might have to suck on a few jazz fags before getting out their calculators for that job, which is a great line. And he was saying exactly what you're saying, that the early smoke signals from UEFA are that they're positive to this. So, but he actually then takes it into, I suppose, a lash at League of Ireland fans who just see anything that distracts from the building of the league not on their agenda, and so he does have quite a harsh thing of them.
He was talking this week to Shamrock Rovers manager. He goes, I hope that Euro 2028 will lead to facilities, real proper facilities in every League of Ireland club.
But it wouldn't, you see. That's the question. They could have joined. They could have linked that up,
and we would have been okay. But that's not happening. So that was. Yeah.
That's the whole point. This is different. It's stating the obvious here, but this is different from a World Cup bid, or from the World Cup 2023 bid, or from the pie in the sky Olympic Games.
Shouldn't cost much money.
The facilities exist. Whereas this Olympics thing is there'll be a great legacy from the new things we will build, and we'll have a brand new stadium and all that. I would assume that it's with the existing facilities, which
it is clearly.
Maybe that's where Hill said that the Aviva Stadium is ready to go. I presume Croke Park would need a bit of work if they expand the numbers of the Euros.
Of course, if the tournament is that format.
Ireland should get a second stadium if the way it's looking at, because it'll only be one up in Scotland and then the Principality in Wales and then a bunch of English. But what I noticed was that they weren't leading the bid with this will be Wembley final, Wembley semis. There was no mention of the word Wembley, basically. Well, it probably will be the final, but for obvious reasons due to last summer's violence and madness at the Euros, there was no mention of Wembley quite now, just until I think that's still a bad word when it comes to bidding for tournaments.
Not palatable enough to be the UEFA representative for the World Cup bid, but totally fine for Euro 2028, it seems. My
read on that is that's just a row over with FIFA and UEFA over the biennial World Cup. Right. Because the biennial World Cup is supposed to start in the summer of when Euro 2028's on. So that's a whole other thing above our pay grade, the political rows of global football.
Like the point that Tommy Conlon makes is a relatively scathing one of the League of Ireland supporter, Cliona, that you mentioned there. Like he says that most of the opposition to Euro 2028 came from within the League of Ireland lobby, and he says within League of Ireland culture there was a low level but abiding hostility towards the Premier League because the vast majority of football fans in this country support the latter and not the former. Some League of Ireland devotees like to indulge in a type of inverted snobbery via the barstoolers who prefer Manchester United or Liverpool to St. Pat's or Shamrock Rovers. It's a kind of beleaguered cultural snobbery from the chap who likes to believe he has chosen virtue over populism. Whereas I can absolutely see that the natural point from a League of Ireland standpoint, where they are sitting in the grounds that are crumbling and thinking to themselves, should we not have the football organisation that runs the show here entirely focused on what we're doing, especially when you're given the I guess the furloughing of staff or pay cuts in the FAI even over the last little while. There is a value on each staff member in the FAI. There will be a distraction from the work that needs to be done at grassroots level, the facilities that you talk about in the context of Stephen Bradley, in the context of what Damien Duff has said over the last little while. And I can totally understand why a League of Ireland supporter would think to themselves, are we taking our eye off the most important ball here?
Well, Bradley's made a really key point on that this week. He goes, there's a lot of people talking to each other about a lot of things that are really good for Irish sport, but they're not in the same room at the same time. So there's going to be 2 FAI trips to government, one to ask for facilities for grassroots and one to ask for a bit to help support the bid for Euro 2028. And Bradley just goes, why can't that just be the same conversation?
It doesn't make it surely should be. And actually Tommy's piece is,
I'm sure the FAI can give a really good and really long answer for why that can't be, where you're going for 2 different departments, and there is dialogue now with them, and Packy Bonner and all have been up there.
Capital funding during the week, like money did come out, but it's his Tommy's piece is an overall look, because he's saying, look at what they had to do this week. They start the week by talking about 2028. Then they come out with a national plan, a very detailed national plan that Gavin's described at. And then you've got the launch of the National League. And all of those things, I suppose, in the week shows exactly, the ball of fire that they're dealing with after coming off of what he calls a 60 million inherited debt from the last days of the Roman Empire.
Yeah.
So it's worth looking at, but he is harsh. On the League of Ireland, he says it's at times like last week that one wonders if the League of Ireland ever has anything else to offer but the poor mouth and the handout for money from the FAI, from the government, from everyone but themselves. But I mean, it is harsh. I think it's harsh as well. Well, it is, and there's an interesting piece we'll talk about later on about a team in Belgium and how they have also, from nowhere are basically become the Leicester of the Belgian League at the moment. But also one of the things that they've done is by creating an identity for themselves within their community. So they're anti-racist. They're on the left. But it's an interesting comparison, I think, with Bowles here. Yeah. And it's a good piece that's well worth reading in the Sunday Times.
Well, because actually you can when you
read it, you actually immediately do think of Bowles.
As the model, as a potential model for what we could do. And everyone kind of went, oh, okay, can we get some detail on this?
Because they've got Anthony Barry as coach. Is that the model we're talking here?
But no, nothing to do with Anthony Barry. He really did he goes, Belgium is, right. It was three different, Jonathan Hill did 3 appearances this week. One on YouTube, one on Zoom with the other CEOs of the UK associations, and each time the word Belgium came out of his mouth as the model but they started something in 1998. That's where they are now. So in 20 years' time, maybe. I don't know if he'll be CEO. But I presume he was talking about Belgium in the context of Belgium building themselves up to become this number 1 team that everybody's looking at, and the type of football and everything. But I just think this is an interesting story in relation to a team building itself up in the National League, and in relation to the League of Ireland, and how you create an identity and a following for yourself and monetise it and do all those things. And they're a team called Royal Union Saint-Gilloise, excuse my pronunciation, but they're based in Brussels, and they're actually co-owned by Tony Bloom, who owns Brighton, and a business mate of his, this guy called Alexo Muzio. But they bought them for a load of reasons, and they got involved. And there's a very interesting piece here on even the amount of Belgian clubs that have English club connections and how they're all connected. But they're in Brussels, they figured we can commute, it's easy to commute, get in and out, there's a certain amount of spend we'll make on them. But they haven't won the league in 87 years. And they're leading the Belgian league at the moment. It's a really, really interesting piece. It kind of starts off dealing with one of the players, and they have a Limerick-born sporting director, a guy called Chris O'Loughlin. So there's an Irish, and they'll immediately start to get some Irish fans as well. But I think it's a really interesting piece. And as I said, it's how they their stadium is in central Brussels, very near the Eurostar terminal, and they have 9,400 seats. And they kind of made an open air festival. They've kind of gone this anti-fascism, anti-racism, anti-community, very much community spirit. And they've built a following already from that. And as I said, by the money that these guys have brought in, obviously they're building success as well. And the interview is actually with one of their players, who is taking an unusual route.
I think.
Christian Burgess, exactly, yeah. So they're looking at him from the point of view of even he's left at his politics, and he has a degree. His dissertation was on naval arms race between Britain and Germany. He's a vegan and a Labour Party member. So it's a really
arms race between Britain and Germany.
Yeah,
what years?
It's bizarre. It's a bizarre stuff. But it's a really interesting read, I think, because when you think of how do you build identification with a team, how do you build a league, how do you monetize it? All those things are worth looking at, I think.
It's a fascinating case study, and obviously we've got us through. You mentioned there one of the Irish angles there, and also Josh Cullen plying his trade in Belgium at the moment is a very interesting case study, especially when it comes to exporting players. So they're top of the Belgian First Division with 60 points at the moment after 26 games. That goes into a playoffs after 34 games. So that's going to be a big story that'll probably pop up again. It's page 14 and 15 in the Sunday Times. It's Jonathan Northcroft. Just before we move off football entirely, you did mention the League of Ireland there. It is on our doorstep, the new season. We wanted to mention this piece with Eoin Doyle done by Dan MacDonald. in the Sunday Independent. Full circle completed on Doyle's own terms. Recession made him an accidental pro. No one could have predicted what lay ahead. He is back from a career in England. He is back playing with St. Pat's, and he has had quite the career in England, I think it's fair to say, from going through all the different leagues. And I think probably his time at Cardiff is the piece that probably sticks out from this article.
Yeah, well, I think it's a good piece by Dan McDonald, and it's basically what he's saying is, even young people, thinking about going abroad at the moment, and with or without the Brexit thing, but like what you could learn just by reading and talking to this guy, given all of Eoin Doyle's experiences, like in Cardiff, Vincent Tan, he's got some brilliant stories on things that happened to him with owners or managers, but he met Vincent Tan who arrived with his bouncer at one of their training sessions, and they're talking away, and he was actually talking to Tan, thinking this guy is knows a bit about football, he's quite good, and he said maybe I've misread him, and then he says you've got a good goal scoring record, we're delighted with that, and if you can give us a return of 10 that'd be great. And the bouncer said yes, 10 goals between now and the end of the season, and Tan said no, 10 today. And he said all he could say was I'll give you everything I have, Mr. Tan. But he bizarre, he's got some bizarre stories. He was in was it Oldham as well?
Yeah.
The Moroccan owner, and again, just some of the stories are brilliant.
He's scored goals everywhere he's gone.
Yeah.
Amazing.
He said this week again he was at the League of Ireland launch. He was saying at 33, I think I didn't want to come home at 36 when I wouldn't be as effective. So if he's the same guy that scored 19 goals last season in League One, the League of Ireland are about to get a star. Like, it's exactly what the league needs, a 33-year-old prolific Irish striker back from England when he could have easily kept going for 2 more years over there.
Yeah, that's what he's saying. But he's saying he also has business interests here, and he's involved with the creche. So he figured, I don't want to leave it too late to come back and start again. Good luck. He's trying to find a house he can afford in Ireland. You think coming back into League of Ireland, that won't be easy. But it's a really interesting piece, but fascinating on the insight into some of the stuff that goes on at some clubs, and the stories really that we rarely hear from players, but this kind of stuff that goes on.
The irony here is that the piece is done in the Ballyboden GA clubhouse, as we talked about facilities earlier on. It's because that's where his one of the locations for his childcare business is set up, which probably shows the actual structural facilities that they have in Ballyboden to be able to facilitate something like that.
Boden's a great club,
absolutely huge operation. So he's back. Very smart guy, like in terms of his business interests. He left school before doing his leaving cert, he said, and opted to go qualify as an electrician and get earning, and then the crash happens and unemployment made him a full-time footballer by accident, Dan writes, and his career progressed to a professional deal at Sligo Rovers, and that form that made Hibs his first British employer. So it's a great career, well worth.
Georgie Kelly leaving as well. It's the league needs another striker that everyone can stamp their name on. You know what I mean? That can be he has. As I said, if he transfers the goals he was scoring last year, he'll be way too good for a lot of the League of Ireland teams.
I also think if he passes on half the wisdom that he's accumulated to some of the people he's playing with would be huge. You know what I mean? It's genuinely, it would be brilliant for them to hear of experiences and understand, I suppose, what the game is about, as a pro, the difficulties still facing Irish players. And there's a good piece, I thought Paul Rowan had a nice piece as well with Stephen Bradley in the Sunday Times as well, just on it. Really, I thought one of the things that's interesting, these are all linked into the restart of the League of Ireland, but very interesting what he says about scouting. He said scouting made me a better coach, and I think that's really interesting, because he said you look at the game with a completely different eye when you work as a scout, and actually you learn a lot. As it made me, he said, I just looked at a completely different way, looking at finer details, and he said actually it made me a better coach. So I think it's interesting, because we see scouts and coaches as two completely different people.
Absolutely, that's very interesting. So that's Stephen Bradley in the Sunday Times sports section today.
Paul Rowan.
Just want to pivot to Gaelic games then, because there's been a bit written on the scenes between Tyrone and Armagh last week. David Goff sending off 4 Tyrone players and an Armagh player was the story of the Gaelic games weekend last week. And it is interesting that while there's been a tone of, there was an overreaction from the referee, I think actually the prevailing tone has been David Goff did the right thing here, and what he did should be followed by all other referees. Colin O'Rourke has certainly taken that line. Goff did what needed to be done is the headline on his piece in page 11 of the Sunday Independent Sports section. He says it's over to authorities now to stamp out the nonsense. He says what David Goff did should empower referees. Perhaps we will see more refs flashing red cards at anyone getting involved in somebody else's squabble. He says the immediate reaction last Sunday was a suggestion that an appeal was imminent, especially from Tyrone, who had 4 sent off. I'm not sure if there's been any development on that since.
I don't think there has been any. There doesn't seem to have been any, which is really interesting. That this maybe Mick Foley has a good piece as well. They're the two pieces in the Sunday Times as well.
Mark O'Shea makes a good point as well in the Mail on Sunday. He goes, my former teammate Ty Kennelly offered a very simple but sensible solution to the nonsense we witnessed in the Gaelic grounds. In the AFL, following these pushing festivals, officials restart play straight away, ensuring players return their focus immediately to the action. It's a good way of stopping a brawl.
Well, yeah, but the Aussies, but they don't usually. Well, they used to in the Aussie rules. They wouldn't necessarily follow up with any, seriously disciplinary.
Just throw it up and on you go.
Yeah, just throw it up and on you go, which is really what I think they tried.
Felt a bit premeditated by David Goff. Is going, okay, Tyrone are playing Armagh. Armagh are on the rise. Tyrone are All Ireland champions. This is going to boil over, and when it does, just yellow and red's by the letter of the law. Now it is a bit crazy, but
it's his style as well to stand back and watch. He always does that. He always stands back.
Plant the flag in the ground there, going.
Yes, well that's.
And if him and his officials are backed, everyone now knows that could happen in Championship. 3-4 red cards.
Well, that's
could
the
happen,
big question,
which
and
might stop the messing, because it was mostly messing. You know what I mean? It was kind of like I'm a better Greco-Roman wrestler than you.
We better get an Olympic team together in the Greco-Roman wrestling. Yeah, it's exactly that. But when Colin O'Rourke, Mick Foley quotes a lot of different people that talked even on podcasts, including your own one here, with Paddy Andrews and James O'Donoghue and Tommy during the week. That like for years we know that the rule amongst players and teams is one in, all in, and then nobody will get any serious punishment. That's how it works. Everybody just goes in, wrestles around, and off we go again. But it hasn't been stamped out, and so if they want to stamp it out, they're saying, Goff has put down a marker here, and will teams. The really interesting thing I think is on what you said. Sorry, will there be any appeals? If there aren't any appeals, then we know that actually
the penny's dropped.
Penny has dropped, and
spent the first 5 years of this century writing about Tyrone-Armagh appeals.
Yeah.
So there's none to be no harm.
Absolutely.
Yes, especially with Ferg Logan's profession as well.
He was there in the background, trade all of that.
Yeah. It's actually a really interesting point that I think it's Colin O'Rourke makes it, is that so if they do appeal something like this, it is essentially the Tyrone County Board leading the charge in this appeal, which is totally at odds with, say...
Who are the Tyrone County Board who are trying to stamp this out at club level.
Club level, exactly. I hadn't really thought of it on that level.
That's always been the irony, the great irony of these things, it is, yeah.
So like the kind of greater kind of conversation around this, and kind of like what it says about the mentality of the GAA player is very interesting. And you mentioned some of the podcast quotes in Mick Foley's piece. Mick Foley writes, Gaelic Games is living through an era transformed by science and minute physical and mental preparation, yet participation in a brawl is still seen as a bonding tool or proof of a player's fidelity to some hyped up cause.
Right,
It's a warped inversion of all those principles. It is the one thing. I mean, everything's kind of moved away from the caveman mentality except for fighting. It's the big thing, We're like going to defend your teammate because he's being pushed around.
Or the notion
it's not
that
as violent as they used to be, though, these brawls.
Well, they've got smarter. You close your fist now.
Yeah.
Or sorry, you don't close your fist.
Don't close
Holding
the
the
fist.
jersey, the 3-inch Bruce Lee punches is the one that you have to perfect.
But he's so right, the notion that this is a psychological bonding thing.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? But the level of preparation and the backroom teams in GA and the psychologists working with people now, and yet this is seen to be a big bonding thing. I never get that, and he does show that to be just such a bizarre mismatch, really, in terms of
How
that.
do Northern teams beat Kerry, especially Kerry? He's always just drag Clifford, rip his shirt, drag him down into the muck, and so to get it stamped out is a good thing.
Well, I don't know that it's never black and white, obviously, you know what I mean, but you could rerun a tape of that forever and be going, right, he did that and he did that or whatever, but nobody threw a punch, so where do you go? But it's that rule of the people who go into a row that weren't involved in it, it just wasn't ever used, and they finally look as if whether they've told referees it's time to actually implement it, or whether that was a David Goff just doing it himself, we don't know. Colin O'Rourke does make the one which drives me absolutely nuts, and he does point out, and that's the one of people not giving the ball back, and that's very often what kicks these things off, and it drives me crazy. And they started getting strict on that at some point, and then they just stopped doing it again. But he's saying the deterrent for that should be black card, move the play up 50 metres and get on with it, because that was that was clearly a deliberate thing that people were doing for years, and it is one of the it always creates flashpoints, like it does happen, particularly late in the game. You know, if scores are close, whatever, it does happen.
And with Tyrone-Armagh back looking like contenders again, we probably will see the game.
We can see it anywhere, in fairness,
Maybe that's it. Maybe they saw that the two rising tides from this great rivalry were coming back, and they said to themselves, we need to do something about this. So like it's going to be interesting to see if there's going to be other referees who take up the David Goff method, because it is there in the rule book.
And they're applying it now,
Contributing to a milli is the exact phraseology. So maybe Tyrone have seen that and decided an appeal wouldn't necessarily get through that. On that same page, Cliona, we might start off with you on this one. Mick Foley is also writing on the potential amalgamation of all the different Gaelic Games bodies. A GPA motion is going to Congress to see a proper timeline to hurry on the wandering 10-year journey, writes Mick Foley, to amalgamation between the GAA, the LGFA and the Camogie Association. And his whole point in this article, or his whole question, is why is this taking so long? Who has been stopping this? But he does go on to kind of paint a picture of, I guess, why you might understand why the LGFA have been dragging their heels a little bit.
Yeah, it's never clear to me why anybody is dragging their heels on this in some ways, but then I also understand in other ways why they would do it. So I'm kind of in the middle ground here. But he's saying that, look, so it might have gone under the radar this week, because I think, you know, a lot of stuff was going on, but the GPA threw up a motion, and they were really just looking to get a timeline on what they're really talking about when they talk about amalgamation, because we keep hearing about it, and it goes back as far as Liam O'Neill, who was really the first one to give it a decent push, I think. But 97% of GPA members are in favour of it. He's saying the government wants it, Sport Ireland wants it. The GPA and the WGPA merged in the last year, so now they feel now there's a power here that they can then at least put it on the table and have a discussion about it and see where is it happening. He's saying that the LGFA are the ones who appear least willing to go in under a commercial umbrella, or go in under the one body, and you hear off the record and on the record stuff you don't know. It would certainly seem to me that the Camogie Association have more to gain, because they have less money and less power and less numbers, and by going in under the one umbrella and trying to get this one club and then one county thing going together, there's more for them. The LGFA are far more advanced in many ways than a lot of sporting organisations in this country, and I think at Congress this year they're going to announce they have more than 200,000 playing members. So that's a big population of members. Do you know what I mean? And they do incredible work. Like even during lockdown, some of the stuff they were doing in terms of just education and promoting former players, and they just never stopped. You know what I mean? They are an incredibly forward-thinking, I think, proactive organisation. So the argument there is, what do they stand to gain if they go in? And one of the key things that would go to stand to gain for everybody is we wouldn't have these constant clashes.
Yeah.
You know, but you are talking about people will have to give up stuff. You know, some clubs and some county boards are brilliant in sharing facilities and doing things collaboratively, but some aren't. So and also I think the example of women's rugby, now very different constituency, because women's rugby don't have anything like the playing numbers, but like there was a big call for women's rugby to go in under the IRFU, and then when they did go in under the IRFU, they seem to have discovered that a lot of what they heard was just pure lip service.
A lot of them regret it. Yeah,
and regretted it.
2017 Women's World Cup here, which was just a disaster. A lot of them were saying, we shouldn't have done this. We shouldn't have gone in with them.
And the lack of ambition
gave them an excuse to actually
then
sideline us.
Yeah.
But it is very different constituency.
It's a very different constituency.
Mick Foley's key line is the GAA's hierarchy knows privately this is the only way forward, ethically, politically, practically and financially. Now, that means that financially was the most interesting word he used there. So that means it is a benefit to them financially. They won't have to give up too much if everyone comes under one umbrella. I'd like to know more detail about that.
Yeah, I mean, that's there's a lot to come through that. But I suppose the other thing is what is the benefit to the GAA? You know, I think that socially now it is seen as, how could there be three different organisations running Gaelic games in this country when, you know, one of the games of the year last year and one of the teams of the year were women's football, and anybody who was a GAA fan supported them. Do you know what I mean? Yeah. And feels they should be getting exactly the same as the men in their county. So things we've said for years about Dublin and Cork.
If they bring it in,
And also, it's my information as well that even successful female ladies football teams, even if they do have the same sponsors or the same support, they don't get the same cut as the men, and that's the reality. If they were to reveal figures, they're battling all the time. Sure, even we remember that's why the Dublin women, if you remember, Mick Bowen said that's why they allowed access and made that Blue Sisters documentary, was because they said the money we'll get for that now we will use to feed players after training, you know, because they didn't have that at the time.
Rugby can keep it down because it's professional, amateur, two different things, and that's the way. But the FAI have a similar problem at the moment now, because they didn't come out and say it outright in their strategy, but they said that they're almost about to say we'll punish a club that doesn't have a women's team, doesn't have structures. And Vera Pauw spoke in detail this week about how if you don't give there is no pathway for the 10, 11, 12-year-old girls, and there should be several streams of pathways for the really good ones should stay playing with boys. They need to change how the rules are for 11, 12-year-old girls to playing with boys. They need to be put into good, streamlined leagues, which just don't exist.
You need to create competitive
Once everyone's under the
structures,
same roof, which the FAI are now grappling with, once that comes under the GA have no argument to ignore or to not go, like, really make giant leaps towards equality.
And you see, the government has talked about introducing a mandatory percentage of having gender balance on your boards. So there is 40% they're looking at for, I think it's 2023, and so that puts the GA under pressure, because they need to get more female in the administrative or the board side of their things.
That can play into the LGFA's hands a huge amount, you'd suspect, in response to the danger of being pushed to one side. They know that number has to go from 20% to 40%. They know that they'll have to be in positions of power, and they know that they can utilise that to ensure that they get off to a solid start here.
Well, 2017, this came up in the Oireachtas when the three CEOs from GAA, FAI and the IRFU were there, and Philip Brown he said no, we can't be letting quota systems come in where you force us to put them on, because the women just don't exist who have the knowledge of the rugby game like the men, and it's there in black and white to this day. And it's only 4 or 5 years ago he said this, like a ludicrous thing to say. And John Delaney 2 seconds later stood up and supported him, going, and but that same year the IRFU made a mess of a women's World Cup at home, and we knew that the women's football team were trained in their tracksuits in airport toilets. So like the trick is, if you're a part of a major sporting organisation, is don't let the government get a nice clean PR day with bringing in quotas or bringing in forcing you to do things. Just get ahead of it.
Get ahead of it. I think that's the point, and this is his point.
Progressive sporting organisations in Australia and other places around the world, they've just got out ahead of it. Like World Rugby just saw such an easy one there by adding. They didn't make you remove men.
It's a huge growth here.
They gave you 3 representatives as opposed to 2 on their main decision-making board 3 years ago. That force, and you can't be a man. The third person has to be a woman.
Yeah. Well, he does point out, like he was saying, in the 2017 5-year strategigic plan by the LGFA, it didn't contain a single substantive section on amalgamation. Now, I think the conversation has moved on since then anyway. And one thing that caught my eye very much this in the past year on was the Camogie Association saying that they were amalgamating with the GA on commercial work. And that's a really interesting thing to see. So they can see there that they benefit, whereas the LGFA in the past year, every single little like a new initiative, whether it's girls football or whatever, they've got sponsors, new sponsors for everything. Their sponsors, literally, it looks to me, queuing up to get involved with women's football. So there's lots of reasons why they would feel, we can manage on our own, but I would love to hear them at some point say why do we think amalgamation isn't a good idea right now, or when would we be? Because the players want it, because the problem for them is when they have problems with funding or access to pitches or
that's what I was going to say.
Classes,
pitches is the main thing here.
Pitches is a huge thing.
Pitches and change rooms.
This is a huge issue, because we know already that in some GA clubs they haven't got enough pitches for their current underage structure. So if they bring in more teams and they expand their women's side, where do they play games? But this would create a whole different talk about equality and who gets, who gets. So that's a big issue, and that's why the players want it. They really do. They feel, and they don't want any more fixture clashes. Now look at Meath County Board, with a classic example of this year. Ran their men's county final and the women's county final on the same day. And that was a big move to do that. And I think we need to see more and more of that. And if we see that working, then that's how you can see amalgamation is the way to go.
do them one day apart. You know what I mean? Even like a big leap.
Definitely don't clash them.
Yeah, just put them a day apart. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
Give everyone
I think
their centre
it is
stage.
definitely. And I was talking to some players this week at the launch of the Women's National League, and I'm delighted to see the Sunday Indo gave a good piece. Nadine Doherty has a whole page this week on the relaunch of the Women's National League and previews of all the teams and everything. But you're talking to players, they're like, why are we not all part of one organisation at this stage, and when will it happen? Yeah. So there is a growing appetite for it.
It seems like an obvious step at this point. Just one last thing we just wanted to touch on before we wrap up. Cliona, if you want to pick this up, it's page 60 and 61 of the Mail on Sunday. Mark Gallagher got a 2-page spread on Serrano Taylor, April 30th at Madison Square Garden. Breaking barriers for a multitude of reasons. April 30th at New York's Madison Square Garden is shaping up to be a fight to remember. He kind of covers everything from the fighters to the commercial aspects to obviously some of the issues around the fight as well.
Yeah, I love his line on Hearn, and he says his bladder can be hard to take at times, but there's no doubt that Hearn is adept and carefully managed Taylor. Yeah, really good overview of why this is being seen. Now when it was launched, it was very interesting because all the promoters were straight on saying this is the fastest selling fight, the second fastest selling fight ever in the history of Madison Square Gardens. But I actually, if I could afford to get the flight, I would definitely go, because do you know what price the tickets are?
What are they?
$56.
It's cheap, isn't it?
That is, you know.
You wouldn't get a
you barely buy the pay-per-view for that price.
Yeah,
do you know
true.
what I mean? So like
$80 to
so,
get a card.
yeah.
Like, and that's like face value, yeah.
And so for such a big fight, I was like, why is it so cheap for a start? But if you're selling them at that cheap, then you're going to get a big crowd. And obviously you get the Hispanic as well, with the Puerto Rican connection. There's a huge Hispanic and a big Irish community. This is for loads of reasons, not to talk about the quality of the boxers. This is going to be, it's fair to say this is going to be a huge and groundbreaking fight. And he says, I think Taylor's due to get 2 million, and Serrano will receive over 1 million. So that's the level we're talking about here. And it's just a really good overview of why it is as important as it is now. And he also talks about the place of the YouTube guy who supports her,
Jake Paul.
Yeah, Jake Paul, and he's been out championing her, Serrano, very much so.
And he's done a pretty good job of it.
He has done a really good job of it, and went to change words with Bob Arum that
Is it him or his brother just looking to fight Canelo?
That's Jake Paul as well.
It's him. Yeah. So there's a really good overview. Just say it is a very good overview. And also he makes the point that boxing at the moment as well, it's a double page, really good reader. He's saying most of the top men have been avoiding each other and continue to avoid each other, but actually now it's taken a long time to get it together, and that was obviously a lot of negotiation involved. But actually this is a really, really high quality fight. But I just think it's amazing for that price. You would hope the place, should be the second biggest seller.
It'll be hopping there that night, no doubt about it. Guys, great stuff this morning. Thanks a million for all that. That's today's Sunday paper review. You'll be listening to Gavin Cummisky and Cliona Foley over the last little while. You can get the full piece back on podcast. You can download the OTB Sports app and get it there. We'll chat to you next week.
The Sunday papers on Off the Ball.